Hey, everybody, welcome to another great presentation for our virtual conference. And this presentation is called Using Experiential Feedback Data to Optimize Recruitment Operations. And our guest presenters today are Ian Alexander, co-founder and CMO of Survale, and Tony Suzda, the Senior Manager of Talent Acquisition and Strategy at Dent Wizard. Gentlemen, take it away.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. And welcome to everybody. My name is Ian Alexander, as Kevin said, and we're here to talk today about how Dent Wizard is using experiential feedback data to optimize their recruitment operations. And I'm joined, as Kevin said, by Tony Suzda, Senior Manager of Talent Acquisition and Strategy for Dent Wizard. Tony, welcome.
Thank you.
And myself, as Kevin said, I'm co-founder and CMO of Survale. And just to kind of level set on Survale, it's the platform that the Talent Board uses annually to conduct their amazing candidate experience research and administer their Candy Award program. And many of the Candy Award participants log into Survale to see the results of that particular program. But what we're talking about today is beyond that, and it's how Survale can enable our clients to gather and analyze feedback in real time at each stage of the hiring process, as opposed to a periodic benchmarking system. And that's how Tony and Dent Wizard have used Survale over the last, it's been about, what, 2 years, Tony, would you say?
Yes, a little over 2 years.
Okay. Well, time flies when you're having fun. So we're gonna talk about how what experiential data is, what Dent Wizard's process is, some of the challenges that Tony faces and what he's doing, how he collects feedbacks, what are some of his key metrics, how this experiential feedback data figures into sort of the day-to-day management of the recruitment operations at Dent Wizard, and then some of the results. So we'll get right into that. And first I want to kind of level set on what is experiential data, right? So most organizations are run by operational data, certainly recruiting and HR organizations. And that operational data it's objective data. It's what happened, when did it happen, who did it, where did it happen. So to put that in recruiting terms, let's say a candidate is dispositioned to an interview stage. That's what happened. When did that happen? Well, we have a timestamp on that. Who did it? Who was the recruiter that was working on that particular project? And then where did it happen? Which department, which division, et cetera. It's those kinds of objective data that power most of how organizations manage their operations. Now, when we talk about experiential data, we're getting into the subjective world, and that's when something happens, how did what happened affect you? Whether you is a recruiter, whether you is a candidate or a hiring manager. What was your reaction to what happened? Were you satisfied with it? Was it disappointing? And then what could be done better? Well, how can we do this better? That's kind of experiential data that when you put together with operational data, just unlocks a tremendous number of facets to how you can view and optimize your recruiting operations. So with that, we're talking about operations and processes. Tony, can you kind of give us an overview of Dent Wizard's recruiting process?
Sure. So Dent Wizard is kind of to start off for our business. We are a business-to-business auto reconditioning company. So while our operations are very, big, we work in a small market of auto reconditioning with rental car companies and auto auctions and dealerships. And we're about 3,000 total employees, about 200 hiring managers we work with. And I have a team of about 7 recruiters right now, 7 to 8 recruiters that handle all of our positions. Primarily, those are technician positions. So the dent pushers and the painters and the interior recon techs. And so those are the main jobs that we're looking for on a daily basis. So the recruiter is actually going in and opening a role at the request of a hiring manager. After a short approval process, the job goes out there. It gets posted both on our website and then on numerous other job aggregators, different websites, niche sites. Craigslist, believe it or not, is probably one of our biggest resources. At least for the technician roles that we have. The recruiter is going to collect all that data, all those resumes. They're going to talk to the candidates. They're going to kind of pre-qualify them, if you will. Then they're going to send, sometimes depending on the manager, they might send the manager some resumes up front. If it's, they're kind of questioning skills, maybe for the more technical roles or the more experienced roles, like a painter or something. Otherwise, they are just setting up interviews for the managers at certain sites and locations. Because our technicians are out doing work in the field and their jobs aren't always in one place, the managers are definitely not all in one place. So our interviews take place in hotels and Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts and all these different places. So a manager will give a time and a place, and we set up the interviews there. And, if we have a fixed site, we always try to bring them there for the interviews because it always looks a little better for the organization. But we set up those interviews. The manager will go through their process, maybe set up a demo if, again, technical position, and they'll move through the process, say, we want to hire them, and the recruiter will commit to the onboarding. And from there we go through a short onboarding process and the person starts. That ultimately is the quick down and dirty on how we recruit and kind of move everybody, a candidate, through the process. We definitely focus, I will say, in our process a lot on the candidate experience. That's very, very important to us. So you heard me mention things like it's really, the candidate will go and meet at a non-Dent Wizard location. Well, we always try to make sure that they know who they're meeting, that manager is set up to make it, even though they're not in an interview room within our facility, that they make it at least as private and as Dent Wizard cultured as we can. Just to make that person feel like, okay, this is a company I really want to work for. And so we try to set them apart. We'll, bring in, some Dent Wizard material, some swag, some things along those lines, just to make them understand, hey, this is part of the culture, kind of being out there. And so making them just experience that from the beginning is really important to us.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, like most recruiting processes or business processes in general, it's very easy to bullet it out. Looks very, very step-by-step oriented, but you're really dealing with a lot of variables, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got different constituencies between recruiters, hiring managers, candidates, but you're also dealing with different locations, as you said. How do you maintain that candidate experience and that employer brand when your managers are out there meeting in the field, and it's a bit of a black box. You've got the system and you've got these steps, but when it gets executed in the real world, there's both intended consequences and unintended consequences, I'm sure, that you need to keep track of.
Yep, and as we move forward in the presentation, we'll talk about things about how data really, really helps us kind of control all those variables and learn, how we can better implement those different steps, how we can really, truly learn our candidate and give them a better experience through all those variables and all those different things in the more traditional environments and the non-traditional practices that we have to use.
Yeah, which is a great segue into sort of challenges. I wanted to kind of talk with you a little bit about what kind of challenges Dent Wizard faces as an organization, whether they're completely unique to you or just sort of general challenges that anybody could relate to.
Yeah. Well, I think the number one challenge that we have right now is one that everyone can relate to. It's the market that we're in. There are now more roles and more opportunities out there then I think there are candidates seeking them out. So, you have a lot of people in roles already just kind of looking for that next adventure or that increase in compensation or that promotion. And, we have to, in our instance, a lot of the people we're looking for are entry level. So we're not looking for those people. We're looking for people that are looking for either their first real career, or they're looking to expand their career in something else, something, whether they might be a detailer or work at a tire shop or be at a mechanic's apprentice. And we're looking for them to say, I really want a career in something like paintless dent repair or to become an automotive painter. And those are the types of things we want. Another obstacle we run into is just attracting people, understanding what the EVP, the employee value proposition, is to our key candidates, what they are seeking, so that we can understand, all right, this is what we need to go out and we need to go after. We need to propose, whether it be compensation. For us, we work on mostly a commission model for our technicians. So really putting it out there into the world and into the market that you can make as much money as you want. You just have to put in the effort. That is a powerful value proposition for us. But, that's not the same for, say, a detailer who doesn't have a commission plan. Then it's, for them, it's about being able to come in and kind of do the work and get that instant gratification. So really, it's an obstacle and a challenge to understand what value we can put on each job to attract candidates and how we put that out into the market. There's, because of, we're competing with, dozens of other companies that use them, maybe not other recon companies, but body shops and car dealerships and some of the places that we even service, we're competing for candidates. And so we need to know, how do we put that information out there and get that in front of those people to say, hey, really, I should look at Dent Wizard. And how do we overcome some of the negativity that we have? Dent Wizard, as all companies, has those individuals that sometimes, go out there and they leave a negative comment, a feedback, because they didn't have a great manager, or they didn't have a great experience in their interview, or they didn't have a great experience at Dent Wizard. Maybe it just wasn't the job for them, but they went out there and, said something negative. And so we've got to go through and make them better understand, that those are one-offs. And, when you go to a restaurant often, you don't leave you don't often call the manager over to tell them what a great job their employees are doing. I mean, it's something I try to do because I know the impact it will have, but people go out there and they leave negative comments, I think, more often than they come and leave back the positives, unless they're asked, which again goes back to why it's so important for us to collect the data, is because we're asking, we're showing them, hey, it's important to us. We want to make things better. We want to have a better candidate experience. We want to have a better opportunities for our potential employees. And so we want to understand you.
And just to your point, when you capture those, when you gather that feedback and you see a negative situation develop, you can intervene in that and keep that in-house, as opposed to it getting out to social media or Glassdoor or just word of mouth out on the street. It gives you that opportunity where you wouldn't have it otherwise.
Very, very much so, yes.
Yeah, and then targeting those candidate segments. I mean, one of the things that this conference is about is diversity, and I would imagine that the more you understand your candidates, the more you're able to tailor processes to meet diverse experiences out there in terms of different people approaching the company in different ways, and whether that's a gender difference, whether that's a ethnicity difference, etc. I imagine that the more you know, the better you're able to kind of understand who is applying, and if people aren't having success in the process, how can that could be made better based on the feedback.
Yeah, recruiting isn't a one-size-fits-all. So you said it, when it's about tailoring expectations, and by collecting data, we are able to build a much more well-rounded individual, because we know what we're looking for. Skills are so important, today. But, we have a saying kind of, and I'm sure other companies have this too. It's not a new saying, but it's, hire for attitude, train for aptitude. Yes, it's important to know how to paint a car, or it's important to know how to, to detail or wet sand and buff those, or, the types of things that we're looking for. But we also do a lot with trainees. We bring our techs here on site, and we'll bring them here anywhere between 3 weeks and 8 weeks, depending on the program they're in, and we'll train them how to do that job. So, we're asking a lot of information to understand who they are as a person, what's important to them, both in a work environment as well as their personal life, because, you want that work-life balance. One thing we've noticed in collecting data is our most successful technicians are those that have a creative background. We do graduations at the end of every session where we do training, and one thing that really stood out in my mind is we asked them to say, hey, one interesting thing about yourself. And almost always one thing we find is that a good 80–90% of them have something creative, whether it be music or painting or sculpting or, and it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with cars, but they are creative. And so we understand that that's our person. So we want to be able to, and I don't want to use the term exploit that, but we want to make sure that we can go out there and say, hey, this is a creative environment. We can embrace that. And so understanding of employees' basic needs and their wants and their desires is really important for our diversity, and understanding that, it's not again, as I said, one size fits all when it comes to recruiting, that we understand, hey, we have to be a little bit different in our approach to a detailer. We have to be a little bit more different in our approach in this specific area, this specific market. We're going to recruit very, very differently for a technician in San Francisco than we are in Dallas, than we are in Miami, and then we are up in, Vermont. So it's very, very important that we understand our candidates and the demographics in different areas, as well as just, again, right down to the needs and the wants of a specific type of technician.
For sure. So to kind of piggyback on what you were talking about before in terms of your process, what I've thrown up here is kind of some key steps that I know, I believe, Tony, you guys gather feedback at, and some of the kinds of feedbacks that I see and we see gathered at these points. And we typically start off with a phone screen, interview, offer, quality of hire. These are great points to gather feedback, and it's important gathering feedback from candidates or recruiters or hiring managers. You really tie them to something specific. General stuff is going to give you general data, which is not as valuable as anchor data. And the other thing that breaking it down by step is that you can then get less information at each step. So you get better response rates. No long surveys. You just need a few questions at each step. And then you get data that's anchored to a specific process. It's easier to then look at that part of the process and optimize it based on that feedback, and you'll get more feedback. But as we look across these, you see across all of these steps, Amplify brand is in there. Tony, you mentioned your sort of employer value proposition, the brand that people are relating to or not relating to. When at each step, just by asking, you are boosting your employer brand. We see it time in and time out that candidates are just thrilled to be asked for their feedback in a process that is maybe not the most fun process to go through in your professional career, but when people are asking how you're doing, right there, you're amplifying your brand. Another important thing to do at each step is to really measure the net prospect score, or net promoter score. So net promoter score, most people know about, it's a 10-point scale where you ask people how likely are you to refer someone to X. In this case, it's to apply for a job. So measuring that NPS score, it measures that in a specific way that really gets to the heart of whether you've got raving fans out there promoting your brand or you have detractors out there. And we'll look at an NPS score here a little bit later. But the other thing to at the phone screen is you want to gather recruiter feedback. Hey, candidate, how did the recruiter do in the phone screen? Were they on time? Were they respectful of your time? Are they knowledgeable? All those things. Finding out sort of how that went with the recruiter gives you the data points. Is the candidate satisfied, and what can we do better in terms of making sure our recruiters are hitting their marks when working with candidates. It's a good spot to do brand affinity checkpoints. In other words, what is your impression of the Dent Wizard brand now at the phone screen process? And then, hey, a couple steps down, how do you like it now? What's your impression of the brand now? That should be something that is stair-stepping upwards as they get deeper into it, or maybe not. And you might have some issues in terms of your process and how people are supporting that employer brand. And then at every step, you really want to identify any issues that are coming out of that particular process. Same thing with interview. Measure that net promoter score. This is where you can find out what's happening in those hiring manager meetings, whether they're in a hotel in Toledo, whether they're in a remote office someplace, whether they're in your corporate office. What is the set and setting? How is the manager performing? Are they respectful of your time? Are they looking at their phone? Do they really know about the job? As the candidate connecting with the hiring manager in a way that you want. It's a black box for a lot of recruiting organizations. What's going on in those interview meetings, and having this sort of real-time automated feedback collection in your process really opens that up for you and allows you to really optimize that as well. Again, ask about the brand affinity at this stage. You want to see it stair-stepping up or at least staying steady. That goes right into offer, really same drill, but you really want to understand, why are they accepting an offer or rejecting an offer, right? Again, objective data will tell you that 70% of your offers are accepted. What it won't tell you is, of those 30% that aren't accepted, is it pay? Is it benefits? Is it work-life balance? Is it something else? This is where you get that great data that, if you feel like you have comp issues, you're not going to your comp department saying, look, we're not hiring as many people as we should, we need to pay more in this particular role. Now you're coming with data. You're coming with experiential data that's gathered that can back up strategic change to get that offer rate up. And again, surfacing any issues with offers and candidates, this is pretty crucial. You got your A candidate, and if they're turning down an offer, at least this gives you a checkpoint where you can go back and try and save that particular candidate if you're getting negative feedback on the offer. So there's a real-time aspect to it too. Then that just flows right into onboarding and quality of hire. Once you've got that year one employee, you can gather feedback through that first crucial year where most attrition happens. You can gather performance milestones. You can gather feedback from hiring managers and candidates about, are they hitting their marks in terms of production, cultural fit data, feedback on the employee and the hiring manager from both the employee and the hiring manager, and really, again, giving that real-time ability to identify issues in that crucial first year. And with that, I want to kind of go into your metrics, Tony. This is your dashboard that you look at, giving you that experiential data, or one portion of it. And I just kind of was curious with you, Tony, and these are great numbers, by the way. And I'm sure data that most recruiting leaders would love to have at their fingertips day in and day out. But what's most important to you here, and how do you kind of use these particular metrics?
Yeah, as I said earlier, candidate experience is most important to me because, again, people talk. We go out there and you think about all those different things about, people going in for an interview or talking to a recruiter, and they hear, something that just doesn't go right. It doesn't pass the sniff test, and they go back home and they talk to their brother or their brother-in-law or their best friend, and especially in the automotive industry, just like so many other industries, is that everybody knows everyone. These are people that cross paths 2, 3+ times in their career. And so it's very important that we know what they think of different steps within the process and what their experience was, because then we know what's going on out in that world. We don't have to worry about like reading it on Glassdoor or Indeed or a LinkedIn review. We know in real time what that person was thinking, and if there was a great experience, where the breakdown was, if it was just in one spot. And so we look a lot at different things like the interview satisfaction, the candidate. So we, as I think we said earlier, is that we collect data at every single step in the process. So we collect data after somebody applies. We collect data after they talk to a recruiter. We collect it after they do an interview, and so on down through the process. And it's very important to us that we know where the breakdown was, because so often, it's something along the lines of a hiring manager. So understanding like interview satisfaction, what was their satisfaction with that, and the comments. If they had a poor satisfaction with an interview, what was it? One of the most common ones we get is, the hiring manager was staring at his phone the whole time. And so we constantly have to, go back to our managers and kind of send this remedial training or remedial communication out about interview conduct. And hey, you need to, put your phone down and give your undivided attention. Last week I was talking to a manager and kind of getting some pushback about, some stuff about how important. I said, if a candidate was looking at their phone even, for a few seconds while an interview, you wouldn't hire them. So if you're not going to give your attention to a candidate, they're not going to want to come and work for you. And that it kind of makes them understand. So you're able to use this data, and kind of why these key metrics are so important is because this data is useful, not just to me as a leader in talent acquisition and the talent strategy for the organization, but it's important to the managers. It's important to their bosses, the regional vice presidents. It's important to the recruiters, so they understand kind of how they're doing and where they're going and where their breakdowns are. Is it in communication? Is it in how they're selling a role or how they're selling the company? Are they focusing too much on skills? That was feedback we got recently, that candidates felt like they were just focusing too much on one or two specific skills and not on the overall as an aptitude of them as a person. So that was great feedback, because that's such an important thing for us as an organization. So, the few that I really look at are, as I said, interview, recruiter, and then also we use data from our hiring managers to understand how the process went for them. So were they happy with how the recruiter interacted? Were they happy with how the candidates were fed and funneled to them? Were they happy with the overall process and the hires that they made at the end of that process? Not necessarily the candidate, but just were they happy with how it went? Did they feel like they made a hire because they got the best person, or did they feel like they made a hire just because they had no other choice and they really needed a warm body? We can get that data. So that's another thing that is very important to me.
Right. And to be clear here, you're not sending out surveys manually, right? I mean,
no.
What you're doing here just happens automatically once it's set up. The system is reading what's happening in the ATS, and based on what you do in the ATS, it's firing out surveys to the appropriate people. Just
correct. It is completely hands off and automated for me, and I'll tell you, when I first went down this path, I was really worried if candidates would fill out the information, if this would be, survey overload for them. And I am so even 2 years later, so surprised at the amount of feedback candidates want to offer up just because we asked. It is really amazing.
And also, we're looking at high level details here. At the very highest level, but overall candidate satisfaction is made up of phone screen satisfaction and interview satisfaction. And so you can drill in and get to much more detail on this, which I'm sure that you do. And here's kind of some of the more detail. In the interest of time, we're going to kind of power through this, but in the middle of the screen there's a little bit of what the results of a net promoter, I keep calling it net prospects, a net promoter score looks like. How likely are you to refer someone? The level 9 and 10, you got rabid fans. They're going to promote your organization to their network. Between 5 and 8, they're fine, but they're really not going to be active doing anything for your organization. You really want to drive people to 9s and 10s, and then 1 to 5, they're going to go out there and they're going to social media to their friends. They're going to detract, and so you really need to watch those. And again, this is where your great scores come from, because you can see the distribution there. And then finally, I just wanted to show you, were talking about it's so important with hiring managers. I imagine this is for doing that. This is a great way. This is a grid here with hiring managers on the left side, and then scores over time. This is a great way to sort of identify problem areas, I would imagine. Correct, Tony?
Yeah, we use this data, as I said, in with comments, and we have different conversations. I have numerous different programs and trainings, from quick 5-minute webinars or e-learnings that they can log into and take and talk about how an interview is supposed to go, and different questions, right down to those hard conversations where I have to have them and say, look, if this keeps happening, we can't permit you to be an interviewer anymore. We need to find somebody else, because that's not a good ambassador to the organization. And luckily for us, normally you have those conversations and things turn around. I can sit on, and normally if they're really kind of at that point, they'll ask me to sit in on some interviews with them and give them some pointers, and we're able to do that. But again, through the data that we collect, I can normally pinpoint where the problem is and give them the tools necessary to make the corrections, so that the candidates are giving us those better scores, and it gets turned around rather quickly, rather than having to try to make a guess. So the data is really helpful in that way.
And it becomes a tool then, to kind of leading into the next slide there, is really, month in, month out, managing as a leader, managing the process and the people in that process. This becomes the data that drives that, correct?
Very much so. The data goes out, to me first, and I can, filter it, whatever way I want. But ultimately, I'm looking at, as we saw through the last few slides, I'm looking at very high level, what's our overall score? Okay, 90% is good, but I'm one of those people that, okay, well, how do we drive this to 93%, and then 95%? And how do we continue to keep it both steady but also rise? And so then I drill down to the next and better understand, what recruiters are doing the best, and utilize them to help motivate the other recruiters, and what managers are doing the best. And do I have managers throughout the organization that can help other managers within their region? Do I have data that I can give to an RVP? Because just a regional vice president, which is who all the hiring managers and are going to mostly report up to, maybe district managers. It just like me, I am very, very passionate, very, very protective of my people. And so when somebody tries to come at me or to me and say, your person's not doing the right thing, I automatically want to get defensive and be like, no, that can't be true. So having that data allows us to have a better conversation and say, hey, look, it's not this person. It's not that I'm saying this manager is a bad person. I'm saying that here's the data. Here's what we need to work on, and here's what speaks for itself. And then they're much more open and understanding to saying, okay, let's have a conversation. Let me help you build up this manager. Let's collaborate. Let's have a partnership, which is a much different conversation than just going in and making them feel like you're attacking somebody's character. So it's very, very good for us to look at that data and train our managers. And then, like I said, going back to where we ask managers, hey, how was the process for you? How did things work? And we can make process changes and system changes and all based on that, which is, again, helps us have a great candidate experience, a great hiring manager experience, and gets everyone through the process faster, which goes back to what I said, one of the challenges in the very beginning, which is, the amount of candidates out there in the market right now. Speed is a necessity.
Yep. And it's that alignment, it's that accountability to the data and the feedback, and then that equity of like, we're looking at you, hiring managers, and we want feedback from you as well. So there's equity there. It's fantastic.
Very much so.
So results. Candidate satisfaction. You got a great Net Promoter Score of plus 86, and just so people who are unfamiliar with Net Promoters, it can go to a negative 100. So it's not a 1 to 100 scale. It's a pretty broad scale. So that just in context, that's a great score. Have you seen that grow over the time that you've been using this approach?
We have, yes, we have, because we're able to hone in on those things that have been, I don't want to say dragging us down, but those points that maybe we needed to work on. So we have seen it grow. We have seen all the scores across, go up, very steadily over the last 2 years.
And I imagine, based on what you're talking about, hiring manager performance has seen a boost along the way, right?
Very much so. Probably one of the largest significant increases in the organization. But it goes to the coaching and having that data on hand. If you're putting something in front of them and saying, look, this is just something we need to work on. This is just like, having to learn a new skill, and I couldn't go and paint a bumper if my life depended on it. But this is, interviewing is a skill, and, it's something that we need to work with you on, and here's how I can help you. And here's where it's probably most important for the types of candidates we're seeing. And so we're able to, use those results, and then in turn, within, I would say sometimes less than 30 days, we're seeing scores, significantly increase. Some of the managers that were a year and a half ago, were towards the bottom, now have some of the best scores, just because we have that information and we're able to track it so closely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then, we talked about brand affinity, just asking is a big win in and of itself. But I imagine that the continued exposure and alignment of everybody around, your particular employee value proposition is helpful for that brand affinity, I would imagine.
Very much so. Dent Wizard, because we're business to business, we're not in a retail environment. We expect people, even though we're the biggest, recon company out there, people don't know who Dent Wizard are. They'll say, oh, I had a car, done down the road in this city. Oh, no, that's Dent Devil, or that's Ding Doctor. There's so many of these small companies that are out there. That they maybe don't know us. And so we're really learning, and we're really understanding how to get our name out there on the front end, and make sure that people who aren't in necessarily the industry yet, especially with trainees, know who Dent Wizard is and why they want to come work for us, and why they want to start to invest in themselves, in us as a company, but also in this industry.
Yeah, and we talked about alignment, just getting that common set of data that everybody's measured on. But also, I wonder if that gets you better candidates in the long run if everybody is aligned. Are you seeing an increase in candidate quality because of that?
Oh, very much so. We have, this industry as a whole, and in our organization, has suffered from a significant turnover. It's very much so at the beginning. If you keep somebody, a certain amount of time, 6 months in some jobs, there's the ability that they're going to be here for, years. If they leave before that, they're, that's kind of what we expected. But understanding and getting that alignment and getting better candidates in here, and understanding, again, those value propositions, because we can feed into those, has given us better candidates who are understand, the fact that commission means work hard, get paid more. And we're just seeing candidates who are more overall happy with their job, more overall happy with the company. And, the managers, therefore, are having a better experience all around with recruiting. It impacts the whole cycle.
Yeah, and it makes sense because the most qualified and the most in-demand candidates are going to be the first ones to bail out if things just go sideways or they don't like the way they're being treated. And I'm sure a lot of organizations never get a window into how many of those sort of top flight candidates they lose because there's so many holes in terms of visibility. And then something that's not really talked about that much in recruiting, but it's really kind of an undercurrent everywhere is trust, right? You've got hiring managers, you've got recruiters, and you've got candidates, and it's questionable just how strong the trust is between all those constituencies in this particular process. But you've seen an increase in that trust.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that really speaks for itself. 2 years ago, I'll say maybe even 3 years ago now, kind of before we had the system, we were collecting this data. I had managers who didn't have a whole lot of trust in recruiting, kind of went outside the process. There was even talk on whether or not it was right to have recruiters in our company or going kind of towards an RPO model. Now, we have every single manager values the relationship they have with the recruiter, the information they're getting, so much so that, as I said earlier, some managers don't even ask to see resumes. They put a job out there and they say, here's where I'm going to be at this date and time. You just schedule me interviews. And so, that's trust. That's a lot of trust for a manager to say, I trust you enough to just go ahead and set me up some candidates. I think I'm going to hire somebody you send me. Especially when not that long ago, the value wasn't there for them in recruiting. We weren't partners. We weren't collaborators. So,
yeah. Well, we're going a little bit long, so I want to wrap up on this. But thank you, Tony. It's a great story, and just want to throw up there, if anybody has any questions, you can forward them through the process that the conference here is set up, or you can reach out to Tony or myself directly, and our emails are there. And we want to thank everybody for coming and wish you a great virtual conference and enjoy the rest of it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much.